Hello, welcome to another week. Welcome home. This week we're talking about sex toys and plastic. So if you don't know, my name's Eleanor. I'm a second year liberal arts student at Birmingham Uni and I major in gender studies. And given that it's near the end of term and the essays are due in, and that's all I'm really thinking about, I thought I'd talk to you today about one of the essays that I'm writing. So I'm writing an essay about plastics and the regulation within the sex toy industry. The one thing you need to know here is that there is no industry regulation for sex toys. So if you don't watch the whole video, the one thing you need to know is before you do anything, go find a link in the description. I'll post some links about how you can make sure that your sex toys are body safe. We're going to talk about general things here that you need to know about the space of sex toys in academia. So sex toys do not have a good academic framework at all. There's no standard way of talking about them and there's been no standardised way of categorising them, even though there is a massive range, like what even is a sex toy, what does that mean? It's all a social construct anyway, so anything you say is a sex toy can be a sex toy, like how do we talk about that in academia? So that needs to happen. But there's also been a really strong focus on like feminist and queer narratives to do with sex toys and how they're used and how they might subvert sort of heteronormative ideas of sex, which is great, like that's wonderful, but it leaves out a lot of research. So there hasn't really been much research on cis male experiences of using sex toys and how they feel about it. There's also pretty much no research that I could find about people's experiences of actually buying sex toys and how and where they gain the knowledge about them and what's safe and what the dangers might be, how they access any of that information. I couldn't find any research about that. Moving on to specifically the regulation of plastics within sex toys, plastics are not great, they're pretty dangerous to be honest, and especially when there's regulatory gaps around them. So I'm sort of focusing on the USA, so that's mainly what I'll be talking about, but I'll try and give you a little bit of a broader overview as well. So there is increasing research that suggests the dangers of plastics, in particular phtalates, I think is how you pronounce them, which are chemicals that are added to plastics to change the properties of them. The big culprit here is DHEP. You don't really need to know what this means, I don't really know what this means, but I know the research. It basically leads to a whole range of different things and it hasn't been fully proved, but it's suggested that it could change like the how effective your sperm is, and especially when it's put in for young infants it can change social communication, it can lower IQ, it's been linked to things to do with levels of hormones in bodies. There's loads and loads of research that keeps on coming out which suggests these things are bad, which is why in the US there was a blanket ban on phthalates within children's toys, and I know that in the EU I think there's a blanket ban as well, but especially in most products it has to be under 0.1%. That's not the case in America for sex toys, they are unregulated. And one thing to note is that a couple of people have pointed out in discussions of this that the reason that children's items are often more regulated than other things are children are at greater risk because of hand-to-mouth behaviours. They touch things that are made out of plastic and then they put their hands near their mouth and those plastics go into their bodies. I would argue that with sex toys there's also quite a lot of bodily fluids mingling and bodily organs and all of that jazz that could also put people at risk. So in America, what is the big difference between Europe is within the UK we have frameworks that protect sort of general rules of safety to do with electrical items that are for customers fine. In America, sex toys aren't classified as a consumer item, so they're regulated only by the FDA, which is the Food and Drugs Administration, and these are only for ones that are classified as medical devices, so it's a really, really small number of like vibrators and medical and sex toys that you probably won't have come across, because everything else tends to be labelled for novelty use only. And the reason they put this label on is a way to try and bypass these regulations to be able to sell without regulating their product. Side note here is that this actually isn't a legal defence that is proven to have worked, it's actually proven not to have worked in other cases, so it's highly unlikely that that would stand up in court anyway, but it puts off consumers enough that nothing has been done about it. So if sex toys were a consumer item in the US, they'd be regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The reason that this kind of hasn't happened, or some of the reasons why this might not have happened, is the CSPC tends to like to put risk onto the consumer. So it will it would rather give the consumer the information to be able to make the decision about whether things are safe or not. The issue with plastics is that even if they are put on a label, even though the label says DHEP on it, the general consumer doesn't know what that means and isn't aware of the risks that that could pose, given that like very few scientists even fully understand the risks that these can pose. So it's not really a fair way of protecting the safety of consumers. Also, this would be an incredibly politicised decision, even if it shouldn't be, because in America there have been continual attempts to criminalise some or all aspects of sex toys, and the idea that they would be legitimised as a consumer product by their national organising agency seems quite unlikely. The reason that stuff like children's toys has been regulated is because there's been a massive amount of consumer pressure, and the industry has also been willing to take that regulation because they need it to keep their image. Whereas with sex toys, because they are like quite taboo and because there is no pressure like that, there is no motivation for the industry to change their ways. They're making massive amounts of profit as it is, and the fact that they aren't safe is in no way harming their profits. They have no need to change that for their business models. The only other option which is available would be to prove toxicity in a court of law and therefore have products revoked. But toxic tort law is incredibly hard to prove as well, because you have to prove that the damage was caused by this one item, and there are so many other factors that go into that, and you'd need a massive group of people over a long period of time to be able to prove this, and it's just not sustainable. And also the legal scholars I read sort of dismissed it as people wouldn't be willing to share that amount of their private life in a court of law, which, whether it is true or not, is enough of a statement that it has not happened so far. So this might all seem quite negative, but what does it actually mean? It means that you should support any movement that is trying to get sex toys regulated. Well, maybe not any movement, but that's why people are talking about it and want it to happen. But it also doesn't mean that sex toys are inherently bad or should be avoided. It just means that you need to take a few minutes maybe before you buy one to read up about the materials and see if they're body safe. There are so many guides on the internet right now. There are more and more. The information is out there. You just need to know that it's information that you need access to. That is basically the essay that I'm writing. It's so interesting, and there is so much more that I could say about it, but I won't for now. I'll zip my little mouth and I'll probably talk to you about another essay next week. Good luck with your essays and happy Advent.